This is aisle 42. It's time to talk iced tea. This beverage category is not new, but it's flying off the shelves and hotter than ever, much like the Earth's temperature these days. Wah, wah, wah. In this episode of aisle 42, I chat with Max Rivest, co-founder of Wize Coffee Leaf Iced Tea, one of the brands that's close to our hearts here at Ethical Food Group. Max is a passionate advocate for sustainable practices, and their efforts to support off-season coffee farmers is truly inspiring. He shares their journey for creating delicious, low-sugar, fruit-flavored sparkling iced teas from upcycled coffee leaves that everyone can enjoy. We even discuss the joys of a low-caffeine lifestyle, though I still have a ways to go on that front. So let's get to it. Here's Max from Wize. Max, we know each other through our work at EFG, and we've been around each other a lot, but actually haven't had a lot of time to connect. So I'm glad we're able to chat. And so in classic aisle 42 fashion, I want to welcome you to the podcast with the big question. And that's, if you were to imagine the perfect grocery store of the future, what would it look like?
Oh, perfect store of the future. I mean, as little plastic as possible is probably the first thing I would think of. And, ideally everything is sustainably made, sourced, and hopefully distributed as well. Like minimal, carbon footprint would be fantastic. Actually, part of me wants to touch on like the self-checkout thing because I have a feeling like the future is kind of forcing us to do that right now, even though I don't really like it personally as a shopper. I find sometimes it's convenient because you're like, okay, I just got a quick thing, in and out, boom. But like, I really don't like how it's taking the human aspect out of the retail experience when it comes to grocery. Because I don't know, like it's always nice to speak with someone who's there, who's like trying to help you out or whatever, right? A lot of people, they don't really care too much, but I feel like grocery store of the future would still have people actually at the till, or maybe a ratio of that. I'm not sure if it's all or nothing, but yeah, ideally it's low carbon footprint and sustainably made goods because realistically, like we got to change as a society, as a species, because otherwise we're gonna take ourselves off this planet. It's not like the planet's gonna die. We're the ones that are gonna just basically force ourselves out if we keep up this unsustainability in terms of our industry as a whole.
Well, an apocalyptic ending to that one.
Well,
That's awesome.
that's the reality of things. Like that's why we're doing ethical food and sustainable food because like we're looking at what does the future look like, and if we don't change, it's pretty ugly. So
It certainly is. Yeah. And I know it guides us all. So it's so great to see your product. And we'll kind of jump into it in a second. But I just want to say that your product has gone through an evolution over these last few months or this last year. And so when we get there, it'll be fun to tuck into the details. But for now, I bet you listeners would love to know what it is that you actually make. So can you give us the Reader's Digest version on what is Wize Coffee Leaf Iced Tea?
for sure. So it all started in 2013. I actually overdosed on coffee. I was studying in France, doing my master's finals for first semester. I guess I should say 2012, but then it started really 2013. I had an overdose on coffee, doing masters, playing semi-pro hockey on the weekends, and traveling around and doing a design contract for a client in Vancouver at the same time. And basically just like drinking 7 coffees a day, working myself to the bone. And in the past, I had tried, energy drinks. I tried all sorts of different alternatives, this and that. I always found that everything was just so high sugar. Like I stopped drinking iced tea in high school, or sorry, in university, because I realized it was so much sugar, and that's what made me go to coffee. Eventually, a few years later, still drinking coffee, I went to the very far end of that spectrum, and it, kind of destroyed me internally. And so went to the doctor. He's like, "You had an acute caffeine overdose. You got to get off coffee. Try something else. Try drinking tea." And I was like, I like iced tea, but it's literally syrup in today's world. That's what it is, especially if it's a grab and go. And so one thing led to another. We had an entrepreneurship project that was starting in our masters in France. And going through some newsletters I follow, I found this really interesting study about the coffee leaf and how it's super rich in antioxidants, how it's been consumed for hundreds of years. And essentially, my friend and I, who eventually became my co founder, we thought it was a really interesting basically like a like natural product potential, or basically a raw material to create something that would be really special from a caffeine perspective, because it was lightly caffeinated. And we were just, had some curiosity around it. So started doing a bit more research. We realized that in the coffee industry, you can only harvest the bean for 3 months of the year, typically like November to March ish, depending on elevation. And the rest of the year, basically the 8 or 9 months, the rest of the year, people are unemployed. You know, about 90% of the people are looking for work. So they have to migrate and move their families, and the kids are taken out of school, put into other schools, and then they come back again for the season in the fall. So it's extremely disruptive to grow up in a coffee community as a kid, because you're literally always traveling. It's like it's practically nomadic. I wouldn't say it is specifically like by definition, but it practically is in a lot of cases. So kids drop out at age 11. I'm getting a little bit in the weeds here, but this kind of all becomes the purpose of this product. So we said, hey, well, if the remaining staff in the off season are actually pruning the leaves to aerate the plant and just kind of do some basic maintenance on the plants, why don't we take some of those prunings and see if we can use it to make tea out of it? And in the past, in 300 years ago, Ethiopians, Indonesians were drinking it, and we found that a lot of the articles written back in the 1700s, 1800s about this, they basically said that they just sun dried the leaf and then smashed it up and brew it. And so we had a hunch, because we're in France, my co-founder being French and growing up in the cradle of red wine and cognac and all these fermented beverages, we're like, well, if you look at the regular tea plant that is processed and manipulated so many different ways to create green tea, black tea, etc., matcha, for example, why don't we take that methodology and apply it to a different leaf altogether, being the coffee leaf instead? So it's like applying a technology to a new raw material. It's very much like kind of, it's not a cut and paste, but it was kind of this we thought it would be like. So in 2013, in the summer, we went to Nicaragua. We started backpacking around coffee farms, just trying to find farmers who would want to work with us. We spent a night with one of the guys there who was like a local champion for a bunch of small cooperative farms. He kind of gave us all the dirt behind the scenes of the coffee industry, and thought our project was interesting. So we traded a ball of rum for a big bag of coffee leaves. And then we made our very first batch in Nicaragua. And this was like pretty much just around Halloween in 2013. And to be honest, when we had first made it, we had no idea what it was going to taste like. Like we just literally had no indication at all. And so we were there with the spoon, about to taste this. Our hands are just shaking. We're like, it's been basically 10 months working on this. We didn't go for jobs right out of business school. We like totally pursued this idea on running on my credit card. And as soon as we tasted it, we're like, oh my God, it's actually so smooth. Like it's not bitter at all, or grassy like green tea, even though it has a lot of like the green tea kind of black tea notes. We're like, wow, this is like better than both of those combined. And it's just so smooth that you wouldn't expect it from a tea, because tea is typically bitter or has some tannins in it. So for us, we're like, okay, that's the hook. Like we just realized this has legs. And yeah, that was back in 2013. 2014, we spent a year with regulatory bodies, CFIA in Canada, trying to get approval for the product. They were so confused as to like, is it coffee or tea? And they didn't know how to classify us. So it was basically just a phone carousel. But long story short, they finally got together and said, yes, okay, it's fine. Yeah, and then we launched in tea bags primarily into retail. We grew quite a bit into Canada and the US, up to about 1,200 stores. We then realized that we didn't have really enough resources to maintain that type of growth. And over years of doing events and tastings with friends, we were like, well, the iced tea that we make is actually really good. Like it's lights out amazing. And it's more relatable to 99% of the people. So why don't we start thinking about doing iced tea? And instead of like waiting until later, let's start doing it now. So that was pretty much like 2019. We transitioned all of the business. We updated a bunch of the branding, which I guess you said we might touch on, and launched the iced tea in 2020. Since 2020, it went from 1 gram of sugar, flat iced tea, to now 4 grams of sugar and sparkling. And the main reasons for that was honestly, it just sold better. Like it tastes better with just a touch more sugar. And 4 grams is really like it's 10% of a nest tea. Like it's still so minimal. It's only 20 calories. So you're not really worried about your calorie count too much. And we don't have to use stevia because the leaf is so smooth, and the tea that it makes, it's like it doesn't have that bitterness that you have to fight with sugar and fight with flavor like the other major iced tea brands out there. And so we get away with it because the coffee leaf just tastes really, really nice and pleasant, and it's a nice platform to work with for flavor because it's just very balanced flavor overall. So yeah, now it's a sparkling iced tea, 4 grams of sugar. We have mango, raspberry, and apple. And mango is kind of like the gateway drug, we like to call it, because everyone tries that first because it's like the sexiest flavor, and then eventually people find their staple, whether it's mango or raspberry or apple. My personal favorite is apple. It tastes like a cider but better, and just, I don't know, super clean and crisp. It's kind of like having like a sparkling apple juice when you were a kid in a sense, but it's actually really healthy and not just a bunch of sugar. So, in a long-winded way, that's exactly what we do. We take the coffee leaf, upcycle it in the off season, and we create these amazing sparkling iced teas with it.
That's awesome. And you probably covered like 9/10 of my questions. No, it's so good. I love it. And just to be clear, you just said mango is the sexy flavor. So I'm expecting to see that on a tagline or a t-shirt at some time really soon there, Max. That's awesome. Yeah, I was first introduced to your product when it was a like a flat water, still water iced tea, and it was beautiful, and I loved the flavor, and I loved the approach to caffeine. But when it went sparkling, it just really popped. It really sort of felt like this is where this product should be. And I don't want to put this on your brand. I don't mean to be so prescriptive, but I find for myself it is the perfect early afternoon beverage. I really just like how Midday Squares kind of rocks their sort of their
You're
their
right.
positioning with their product and their chocolate and their treats. I feel like you guys, my favorite consumption occasion for your teas is just it's that early afternoon where I would normally go get that guilt-ridden extra cup of coffee because I am a bit of a caffeine guy. So interesting to hear you went through you went a little too far with caffeine. But I'm a guy that 2-3 espressos a day is pretty normal for me, but that ends at around 11 or maybe a little earlier. And then if I want something refreshing early afternoon, it's really there. And now I hear you around mango. I agree. That is the gateway fruit, but the raspberry is delicious. And the apple, as much as I love it, I feel like I had too many apples growing up. Maybe it's because I'm a BC boy and I was just constantly surrounded by BC apples. I feel like for me, it's the raspberry and mango, but nonetheless, all the flavors are really beautifully done. I want to go back to the work with the farmers and the coffee leaf farmers, and in the efforts to have a ethical brand, a sustainable brand, the aspiration of providing off-season work for farmers that have to really uproot their lives and their families to sort of keep paying the bills and to keep their kids in school kind of sounds like it almost kind of landed in your lap and you sort of tripped over it a little bit. But it must be really remarkable to be able to have an impact like this on family farmers, halfway around the world.
Yeah, I mean, in the last 4 years, just counting the iced tea, we've created over 140,000 hours of off-season work. And every summer it'll range from 50 workers to 125. So if you were to average out, you'd have to do some quick math, but essentially 140,000 hours of off-season work that would not have happened otherwise. And so I think the big thing for us is I've had the opportunity to travel a lot of Latin America, and in the summers I would take whatever money I'd saved up and go do a trip down to Costa Rica, Nicaragua. I went to Chile with school back in university days to do some tourism consulting, and I've traveled Mexico in like a camper with my folks growing up quite a bit. And call it what you want, but it felt like a way to give back in a sense where, like, Coca-Cola is not giving back to whatever lab is creating their flavor. You know what I mean? Like, they're not really using a whole ton of natural ingredients. I can assume. I obviously don't know because it's like a secret recipe. They don't patent it, but I can't imagine that they're giving back a whole ton to their supply chain. So the way I see it, and going back to your question of like what is the ideal grocery store, or the grocery store of the future, you know, everyone in the supply chain should be winning, and also they should be winning sustainably, not in the sense where, oh, they're just making a ton of money. Like, that's great. That doesn't necessarily mean winning. but something where they can sustainably make a business out of what they already have, and they don't have to completely diversify. They don't have to completely change crops every couple of years or whatever just to survive. And we've seen it in coffee before, where right now coffee is really difficult to make a living in. It has been for the last 20 years, 30 years even. And so when the prices fluctuate so much on on the global index, farmers just literally burn their crops because they can't even afford to go harvest the coffee, because they know that at the end of the day, if they sell per pound, they're going to actually just lose money because they have to spend so much on labor and they have so little revenue from it. So they actually, and we've seen this in Nicaragua, they actually burn their crops and they just basically like strip it all for cattle. And like the cattle in Central America is not even like, I hate to say it, it's not even good quality cattle. Like I'm plant based anyways. I don't eat beef, but when I see these cows, I'm like, yo, like that is not a beefy cow, man. That is like skin and bones. And so it's not like they're pumping out Wagyu beef instead, right? So it's really bad for the environment because, obviously it increases methane emissions, and also they're just literally destroying this biodiverse landscape for a pretty hardcore like animal agriculture. And so when we see the coffee industry really struggling, and we have this fairly elegant solution with the coffee leaf being like, hey, the solution's literally right here, like you're stepping over it. Our idea was like, well, why don't we go make something of this, prove that it works, and then basically just tell the world, like, this is a solution that is not only tasty and healthy, sustainable for consumers, but also for the actual supply chain. It's a boon in the off season when there's very little income, and they actually go through seasonal hunger as well. So for us being able to give back, like it's been one of the main drivers. If I were to say, Arnaud, my co-founder, and I, if we were like money motivated people, we would have stopped doing this business like 7 years ago or 8 years ago, right? It would just, if you want to go make money, like go sell real estate, whatever, or go like work 50 hours, a day in Wall Street or something. That's not what we're like. And so for us, it was more about doing something that has lasting impact and that also empowers farmers to do something for themselves, versus like always having this like white savior thing where like, hey, we're gonna come down and like build a well, and it's like cool, but if it breaks or they like it doesn't, some technology thing that you bring in doesn't work a year from now, who's gonna fix it? Who has the money to fix it? It doesn't really go anywhere. For us, it's like, hey, like these are the tools, and like let's go make some tea. And if you want to get creative with it, you can actually process it differently. You can make all sorts of different batches. You can do it different ways. We've done it a huge variety of ways that actually yields different flavors. And so it's cool. Like when you look at the established tea world, in Japan, for example, you have these matcha masters, right? That are just like these little farms where this like tea master is just an absolute legend, and he puts a stamp on the product because they make it and it's their flavor, like they really make it. Similar thing in the wine industry where you have the bottles that are actually, bottled in the castle on those vineyards. It's their wine. It's their final product. They control the final flavor. Whereas in coffee, the beans get shipped unroasted to all the other brands around the world that do the final roasting, and then they capture most of the value. Whereas green coffee is very much a commodity and it's almost 99% labor. There's not a whole lot that goes into, there is, but it's not as, it doesn't add that much value if you do a honey wash versus a this versus a that. At the end of the day, a lot of it is just green coffee. It's very commoditized. So I know this is a lot of details, but this is what makes it so cool. And this is why we're passionate about it, is that by giving them the tools to actually produce tea and get creative with it, they can capture that value and they can add, that cachet to their farm where it's like, hey, we make this our way and you can taste it and it's like nothing else in the world. So for us, we see the future of coffee leaf itself, going way beyond us and actually developing into that really complex, interesting, terroir based, varietal based type of product selection that you get right now in the traditional tea world.
I love it. And if the end product is delicious and a lot of people want to buy it, it just grows with scale and just good things can happen. When you think of the ideal consumer, and I know you're probably guys are always focused on growing the business and attracting those people. What kind of feedback are you getting? Who exactly are the types of people that are really enjoying your iced teas?
Our most like vocal consumer, not necessarily the one that buys the most, but the most vocal consumer are like, I'd say females in like late 20s, early 30s. But then the people that buy the most product are buying for the household, and it's typically millennial moms or like moms early 40s with young families. And it makes sense because the product is enjoyed by literally people of all ages. And from a marketing perspective, in the beginning, that was actually really hard because it's like, okay, who do we focus on? Like, this is getting good reviews from kind of everybody, like in all walks of life and, a lot of age ranges. Our demographic pie is like quite split evenly, but there are some hot spots. And I'd say, typically speaking, our best consumer is essentially a mom that's like probably late 30s, early 40s that has a couple kids and they want to set up healthy habits. They don't want their kid drinking a bunch of crap all the time. They don't want their kid drinking energy drinks with like, 150 milligrams of caffeine or more. In the States, drinks with like 200 plus milligrams of caffeine. And so we're seeing a lot of good traction with that type of consumer, conscious consumers that, they want to try to help good movements and actually vote with their dollars and supporting local. Like, why would we keep giving money to Coke and Pepsi all the time when, they're the big, like, I think Coke is, yeah, I think I saw it yesterday actually on LinkedIn. Coke puts 10% of the branded plastic into the environment globally. Like 10% of our plastic waste is just from Coca-Cola. And they won a Cannes Lion Award last week for like this like recycling campaign. And it's like, sure, I get it, they're trying to be better, but like, man, you got to really look at yourself and be like, really? So, when you see that and people starting to really get wind of it, and there's a lot more awareness today about different supply chain issues and the downstream effects of all these choices we've made as a society. We're seeing those customers come through and they're buying at Save On Foods and, buying our products instead of Coke or Pepsi. And the number one drink that we're replacing in terms of category is actually sugary sodas. Number two being sweet iced tea. And then number three being essentially iced coffee or energy drinks. And so it's interesting to see that we're actually replacing sugary sodas as number one. I will add a bit of an asterisk that I feel like, generally speaking, consumers are moving away from that.
And iced tea is hot right now. I just saw some recent news
Yeah,
on the growth of iced tea is skyrocketing. So now all my American friends, they've been drinking versions of iced tea, for a long time. But you're right, there's a lot more caffeine in a lot of those beverages, a lot more sugar and a lot more of them. So I think that you guys have an interesting niche, but as a category, people are loving iced tea. So it's cool that you're in the space with some great flavors. It's more, and I was describing it to a friend the other day where I said I felt like Wize iced tea is it's softer. I think I said softer. I don't think I said elegant. Maybe I thought elegant in my head. It's not elegant, but it's a softer beverage and it's really easy to drink, but yet you don't feel like you're going to chug it. So you can actually still enjoy it. And for those that are enjoying sort of a bit more of the non-alc kind of vibe, it's very sippable and you kind of feel like you can hold on to it for the can for like a half an hour and still really enjoy it over that span of time. So I think it's perfectly balanced. And I do think for youngers, youngers, what am I making up words now? Sorry, children, they're so used to their sugary beverage or something that, a lot of parents might not realize is full of caffeine. If it has a little bit of caffeine like your beverage has, that's fine. It's totally fine. My daughter's game. She tried Prime for the first time about 4 months ago. And she just like, at first she's like, wow, it tastes amazing. By the third sip, she sets it down. She's like, I can't do it, Dad. I can't drink it. I'm like, yeah, that
that's
doesn't
the thing,
surprise me.
man.
I actually let her do it on purpose. I was hoping that's where this was going to go, but it was a risk that I took.
It's kind of like that. Oh man, what was that show? It might be The Simpsons or something where like they force their kid to like smoke a whole pack of cigarettes in an hour or something just so they'll never smoke again. Anyway, it's a totally different thing. No, like the funny thing about consumer behavior and flavor is when we do demos, people really enjoy the taste, but in the very first sips, a lot of times they're like, "Oh, it's really light." And you're like, "Yeah, because it's meant to be consumed as a whole drink." not like, you have one sip and it blows your mouth off with flavor and then you go buy it because it tastes amazing on the first sip. For us, it's like, no, like this is actually like a sensible design for a beverage. Like you're not trying to like literally just throw napalm on the palate all the time with like, North American food in general and beverage is like so overflavored, oversalted, oversweetened, etc. For us, it's like, no, like this is the beverage of today and the future. It's sustainably flavored in the sense of that you can actually really enjoy it. And by the time you're done the can, you're like, oh man, that was perfect. And a few hours later, I'm actually game to have another one. Like I'll have another one in the afternoon, or if I'm going out with friends, I don't want to have a beer or I don't want to have a cocktail, I'll have this instead.
And I've never said that about a Gatorade. I've never had a second Gatorade. It's like after you get through that first one, you're like, oh, I think I just drank some Gatorade. You can feel it in your gut.
Yeah, and like things like Prime and like Gatorade Zero, for example, lots of the zero beverages that are flavored and Diet Coke, etc. They're relying on so many artificial sweeteners and alternative sweeteners, sugar alcohols, etc. And a lot of them really upset the gut. And there's a lot of conversation right now happening in our industry about how artificial sweeteners, sorry, I shouldn't say artificial because they're not all artificial. Some are, some aren't. Like stevia is not artificial, it's a leaf, but it is essentially a sugar alcohol. And that's a whole nother topic. But people are basically realizing that we've all like fallen for this like silver bullet of, stevia or aspartame or erythritol or monk fruit, that these things are the silver bullet for having a healthy sweetener or a 0-calorie sweetener. But realistically, you're kind of tricking your brain and you're telling the brain that it's getting a bunch of calories and getting a bunch of like sweet, sugars and carbohydrates, but your body actually never gets it. And so in the end, your body, like, at the end of the day, when you go home, your body's craving like real sugar and your sweet tooth is just like raging because you're just constantly teasing it and never actually satisfying it. And so I'm in a few groups on Facebook for diabetes because one of my family members is essentially diabetic now. And I've just been kind of like absorbing a lot more information about this. And also our product is relatable to diabetics, and we have a lot of diabetic fans because they like our product because it doesn't have stevia and it is low calorie and it is low sugar. But I'm seeing more and more people being like, oh man, like I am so tired of this crap, whatever. There's like a keto ice cream, you picked it up and like every scoop is like 30 grams of erythritol or something. And it's just like, man, this isn't even food. Like it's just completely insane. And also there's more studies coming out of Europe showing that a whole variety of these alternative sweeteners are actually still spiking insulin. They're still inciting insulin responses, and they're also heavily affecting the gut microbes and your gut flora in general. So it's disrupting a lot of digestion for people. It is also still affecting insulin on some degree. I'd have to look up the study to see precisely how much, but it's not a silver bullet. And in our case, we told ourselves, we'll never use artificial sweeteners or alternative sweeteners because our tea is literally handcrafted and it does have a mild, pleasant taste. If we put stevia, erythritol, monk fruit, etc., all of a sudden our tea is going to taste like every other low calorie diet drink out there. And you'll lose all the hard work that goes into actually making the tea itself. So when you look at things like, Prime or whatever, they're so aggressively flavored that you get like your daughter, you get through like a quarter or a half of the bottle and you're like, oh man, I'm like 150% like satisfied, I don't need any more of this for the rest of the day. Whereas with our beverage, we try to shoot for that like 98% satisfied by the end of the can. That way you're like, oh man, that was perfect, but I'm not like over the top, I can't do another one. So it's interesting to see where things are going to go, especially with iced tea now getting more traction. It's kind of the original health drink. Like, why did people ever sleep on it? At least for a while. And you're also seeing companies like Nestle actually launch Nestea subtly sweet, and they're using 5 grams of sugar, very similar to our 4 grams. However, they do back sweeten it with stevia as well to try to bolster the sweetness a little bit. In another category, to show that we're on the right track, and also to show that the industry is growing, is the new Straight and Arrows alcoholic iced teas they launched. They're in the 12-ounce sleek cans just like us, and they also have 4 grams of sugar. And they're not using alternative sweeteners as far as I can tell. I'd have to confirm that. But it seems like iced tea is having like a little bit of a renaissance right now because it's finally come back down to earth and like met consumers where we're at, and we're looking for low sugar alternatives that don't taste like the unsweet iced tea of the past in the US that literally tastes like dirt. And so now there's like new varieties, new versions of it. So I'm glad to see that it's happening because we honestly, for a long time, we've kind of felt like we're out in space on our own here. So it's nice to see that big companies are actually getting involved and doing it right.
So good. Where can people learn more and find out where to find your iced teas?
For sure. Drinkwize.com. That's wise with a Z, like it's spelled here. And in terms of like stores, if you're out in the West Coast, check out Save On Foods, Stong's, Buy Low, IGA, Fresh Street Market. There's a whole plethora. If you just go to drinkwise.com, there's the store locator. You can find that. Out east in Ontario, you can get it at Whole Foods, Nature's Emporium, McEwen's, and a handful of other independents there as well.
And been seeing you in more and more gas stations and food service kiosks. And I feel like you're starting to pop up under more and more places, which is great.
Yes, I should mention those locations. It's funny because a lot of it's kind of new to me, so I'm still forgetting to mention those because we've been in the grocery world for so long. But in terms of food service and gas stations, you can actually find us at Tractor Foods. They're one of our best clients, and the food there is fantastic. Highly recommend, as well as Field and Social has some of our product as well. And the Canco gas stations it's our biggest gas and convenience chain. They have about 170 locations, give or take, mostly in BC and a little bit across the prairies. So if you're at a Canco, if you're near one or you're getting gas, honestly, go in there because of all the gas stations I've really been in, and like now that I know them internally and I'm seeing their strategy and how they want to totally modernize their product selection, like I am so happy to see it happening. Like regardless, even if they didn't bring our product in, I'm just like so happy to see that they actually want to have healthy options. So if you're near Canco, go check it out. Like give them some respect because they're also local. They're not Chevron, some giant company. They're actually local and they're trying to make the gas station experience way better and not something that's like stuck in the 70s.
That's awesome. Max, thanks for everything that you do, and to Arno as well, and all you guys that are making this magic happen. I'm glad that our office fridge is stocked with it, and I'm so glad that the Ethical Food Group family and PS and Co and ZGM, that we're all one big happy family together to work together to bring this to market and to help it grow. And obviously seeing these farmers thrive as well is a beautiful part of the story. So thanks for everything that you do.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Aisle 42. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Max. Next time you're at the grocery store or a gas station, grab a can of Wize coffee leaf iced tea. I always reach for the mango one first. From all of us here at Ethical Food Group, thank you for sharing your star ratings, your reviews, and our passion to fix the broken food system, starting with our next trip to the grocery store. Okay, that's it for me. I'm Corbin Hebert, and I'll see you in the future.